Well, I mentioned last night that last week we had a panel on Thursday night, 4 guests covering the sensible political spectrum. I just felt it was too big. I made this point last night. We need time to hear the views of our political representatives, and you then can judge how they handle issues. So it was the men last night. Now it's the ladies' turn. Tanya Plibersek can't be with us tonight. I've asked in her place someone you may not have heard of, Terri Butler. I think this woman has ability. This program will always give you people who can inform and also entertain. This is the lady who replaced Kevin Rudd in the seat of Griffith in 2014. She'd previously worked as an industrial lawyer, but she's not part of the metropolitan elite. She grew up in Cairns. Her husband's from Kingaroy. I think, as I said, she's got real ability. So does our other guest, Amanda Stoker, a Liberal senator from Queensland who grew up in Campbelltown. This is a great story. Graduated in arts and law with first-class honours from Sydney Uni. She's married with 3 daughters, but I didn't say this last week. I was fascinated by her first speech in the federal parliament when she said, quote, "My dad's a plumber, drainer and gas fitter. He had his own small business. My mum worked in a shop as a retail assistant." I think parents are proud of women like these who've done so well. And I always think there's a golden rule in life. Never forget where you've come from. So welcome to you both, Amanda and Terri. First up, unemployment. Terri, can I ask you, Terri Butler, does anyone seriously think that only 7.4% of the workforce was unemployed in June?
Oh, look, I think it's a really important point, Alan, and thanks for having me on the show. You know, we've heard today the official figures are something like almost 1 million Australians unemployed, but we all know that there's more than that. We know that there's people who've lost hours. We know that even before the COVID crisis, there were people who were underemployed, and it was a significant problem in Australia. And of course, the people who really go missing in the figures are the people who just give up on work altogether. They're so despondent that they drop out of the labour market, and so the participation rate drops. So we know that there's plenty of people in that boat as well. So it's actually much worse than the official figures suggest.
Amanda, I take what Terri is saying, but on the figures, to me, I looked at these today in detail, it seems impressive. I think difficult to believe. There's been an increase in employment in June of 210,800. Terri mentioned the participation rate, but it's gone up 1.3 percentage points to 64%. Hours worked have risen 4% in June, still 6.8% lower than March. Part-time employment drove the increase in jobs. That was up 249,000, though full-time employment was down 38,000. Amanda, what do you make of this?
Look, I think you can find something in these figures to scratch whatever itch you've got. But what my colleague, Ms Butler, has said about underemployment and hours worked isn't borne out by the stats, as you've identified. The headline unemployment figure at 7.4% is, to me, still very worrying. And while we don't have anything more than our gut feeling by which to test this at this point in time, it's the same methodology that's been used to calculate these stats for every other month. What I think it does show is that there are signs of confidence returning. The number of casual jobs that were being offered and taken up had increased quite substantially by 210,000. Those are signs that the government's measures are starting to flatten the unemployment curve and get business confidence back. Yeah. And that means the return of jobs. Yeah, but Amanda, just taking up Terri's point, and I'll come back to you, Terri, underemployment has dropped, admittedly, but it was 13.1% in May, 11.7% in June. It's a hell of a lot of people in the workforce who'd like to work longer than the hours that they're given. Terri.
Yes, thanks, Alan. And I think it's important that we note that we're talking here about monthly figures that bounce around, but what is very clear is that since the coronavirus crisis, we have seen an increase in the number of people who are out of work or who want more work. And as I say, there's people who have, during the coronavirus crisis, completely given up hope. And what we really need to do is make sure that this recession, the first recession in 3 decades, doesn't turn out to be longer and deeper than it needs to be. And so that means that we need to have a really very strict focus on jobs and growth. We need to be focusing on making sure that there is support for employment and growing the economy. And that means right now, that means there's got to be some certainty for people. We can't let the economy fall off a cliff come September, and we can't go on with this snapback nonsense.
I'm just wondering, Amanda, you're a stickler. I know you for detail. I mean, what do you make? I mean, OK, we got these figures today, but the number of JobKeeper people was revised in May down by 3 million. Now, if those in making these figures together, whether it's the tax office or whether it's the Treasury, can we trust figures coming out of these people? They exceeded the number 3.5 million were on these payments. They said there was 6 million. It's a pretty big blunder, isn't it?
Look, I am not going to defend their measures other than to say that these situations are fluid, and in a crisis like this, it's very difficult, I think, to estimate what the demand is going to be. But what you can say as a result of looking at this data is that the emphasis of the Morrison government on keeping people connected to their workplace, on keeping confidence in employers to keep the skills on board they need to be able to bounce back as the economy does, and the help that's needed to give people confidence to retain apprentices, to keep on going, is working. We are flattening the unemployment curve, and that matters a lot.
Yeah, they're tough times. Look, could I just take you both to coronavirus, to the two intelligent women? In the middle of all this alarmism and hysteria, why aren't the public told, Terri, that 99% of the cases are mild? And why aren't we told that over 99% of them recover? People are frightened. You must be getting that in your electorate. I mean, they say, oh, we've had 113 deaths in Australia since March, but 440 people die every day in Australia. Do you Terri, you'd be meeting in your electorate people who are worried?
Oh, look, I think people are worried, and I think the difference with this and previous crises of similar nature is that this is a disease that's got a higher mortality rate. And I think we've managed the disease very well in Australia compared to some of the nations.
Terri, hang on, Terri. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mortality rate.
No, not at all.
0.0004% is the mortality rate. Now, can I ask both of you to put your hand on your heart? Can you remember the swine flu of 2009? There weren't 10,000 cases. There were 38,000. There weren't 113 deaths. There were 191. There was no lockdown, no border closures, no daily alarmist lectures from politicians. I mean, isn't it incumbent upon leaders to tell people that 99% of cases are mild and 99.6% recover? Amanda?
But sorry, Alan.
That's okay.
Sorry, Senator Stoker.
I think we need to... I fact-checked this, Alan. I was concerned by the idea that we might be overreacting. So I looked up with the World Health Organization and the Centre for Disease Control how many cases and deaths we've had for COVID-19 worldwide and how many we've had under swine flu. And they worked out to be, on a worst-case scenario, around about the same at this point in time. 574,464 worldwide for COVID-19, 575,400 for swine flu. So I can see that they're comparable at this point in time.
But my point, Amanda, is there was no lockdown, there were no daily lectures. I mean, Terri, swine flu. Can you remember swine flu?
On the figures you gave, Alan, you can see that there were more cases of swine flu, but about the same number of deaths. So that demonstrates that, in fact, COVID has a higher mortality rate. And one of the great things about our country is that we've been able to manage the disease so that our existing healthcare equipment and medical professionals have been able to manage it. And it is fantastic that we've had a low mortality rate from it. And I think you've got to be really careful. Sometimes when you have a win and your parachute works, you don't really notice how bad it could have been if the parachute hadn't opened. We need to be really careful about that. And I know it's terrifying for people. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've got, my parents-in-law, people in my family have been really worried about it. My dad's a hospital, I should say, wardsman, and my mum's a teacher aide. So they've been sort of at the front lines in the community while a lot of other people have been staying home. We're all worried about this disease.
Yes, well,
the question is, what do we do about it? And I think we need to, remain calm.
Yes.
We need to take precautions, and that's what people are doing.
And Terri,
of course, there's an economic impact to it.
And get a bit of perspective in it all. Now, Terri, I've given you the final say because we most probably won't have you next week, but we look forward to having you again. Tanya will be back. And Amanda, I don't have to give you another question because you'll be back next week. So thank you.
Wait.
Lovely to talk to both of you. Very intelligent observations, and we'll have more of it in the panel next week.